Boom. There we go.
We've socially distanced.
All right.
This is my dance space. This is
You know what? It's actually, this is a good, it's very safe space. All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Kabbalah and Coffee. I'm very tempted to say Kabbalah and another C word, but no, it's going to be Kabbalah. No, it's Kabbalah and Coffee. So, today is a very special class because we live in very, I would say in my lifetime, unprecedented times where you have just a lot of anxiety and a lot of concern and a lot of worry about what's happening, what's going to happen. But I'm very encouraged by the fact that people are reaching out to each other, people care about each other, people are being conscientious about themselves, but also about others. There's a lot of sharing that I see going on. As you know, my daughter is big into sharing. Sharing is caring. An incident happened on Friday where she was very upset about something, and through her tears, she said, but sharing is caring. And I'm like, yeah, but that's literally his stuff. So like, okay, you can have it, but, you know, he has to have a turn also. Anyway, the point is that I'm seeing a lot of this really beautiful, you know, just examples of people reaching out and being sensitive and taking care of each other, and it's wonderful, and it teaches about the human capacity to band together and to put things in place. I want to begin with a conversation about, so the topic of today's class is introspection, so we'll talk about that in a moment. But first, I want to speak about the chart of Sefirot, because it's important that we talk about this. All right. Everyone has a copy of this? Sandrine, do you have a copy? You have somewhere in the files? Somewhere. If not, I have a bunch of copies here. Just let me know. So I want to begin with exploring the intellectual soul powers, which we've done before, but there's always one that I feel like gets a little bit overlooked. So let's start from the top of the chart. So we have the first of the 10 soul powers and the first of the 3 intellectual powers specifically is Chachma. Chachma, as we've described many times, is the human capacity for creative intelligence. Chachma is not analyzing what you already know and deepening your awareness of it, or lateral knowledge of applying one thing that you know to another area of study. Chachma is different. Chachma is intellectual conception, coming up with new ideas. It's the flash of insight, the flash of wisdom. It's the light bulb that goes off. It's groping in darkness, not knowing where the solution is, and then getting the solution. Chachma is that initial flash of insight. Chachma is considered to be, within the Sefirot, the notion of yesh me'ayin, something from nothing, in the sense that you didn't have the solution prior, and you didn't know where you would get the solution from intellectually, and then out of nowhere, boom, you have an idea, you have an insight, a thought comes to your mind, and it makes sense, and then you begin developing it. But again, that first moment where the idea emerges out of seeming nothingness, that is Chachma. Bina is analytical understanding. Bina is once you have an idea, the Chachma idea, or when you read an idea, or when you're learning an idea. So it's not a creative idea that you've kind of come up with, but it's an idea that's out there, whether somebody else gave it to you, or whether you've already come up with it, but now it's already sitting in your brain. Bina is your ability to break it down, analyze it, decipher it, make sense of it, apply it to other things, and really, really understand it in all of its particulars. Bina is very much an analytical form of understanding. So Chachma is intellectual conception, and Bina is intellectual comprehension. We're comprehending the information that we have in front of us. But what is dat? I feel like dat is always a little bit downplayed. And I know we've spoken about in this series the power of dat and how dat is the key. In the language of Kabbalah, it's the mafteach. Mafteach in Hebrew means key. The kol shis, that opens up all 6, i.e. the 6 emotions, chesed through yesod that follow. So that is the key to the emotions. That's like the key to the ignition that turns on the emotions of the heart. But what is that really? And how does it operate? So I was thinking over the last few days that what's been going on in the world is very much an indication, not an indication, it's very much a definition, or gives us a bina understanding of what that really is. And I'll tell you what I mean. Going back already, how long has coronavirus been around? A month? More than a month?
This strain.
This strain. COVID-19.
Well, we don't know. It was first identified in Wuhan, but it was
But when?
before
But
that.
when was it first identified?
They were reporting November that it's been around.
Already November?
Yeah.
That's a long time. Okay.
In China,
But
that they knew.
That they knew, but it
when was the
it
outbreak? When was the outbreak first? When did it first happen? Whatever, like a month or two ago, yes?
Yeah.
A few months ago? Okay. But at a certain point in time, it was something that was somebody else's problem. Right? For a long time. Like it was an Asia issue, and it was a China issue, a Wuhan issue. It was somebody else's problem. And then there were cruise ships that maybe came in contact, and then it was their problem. And then as time went on, it slowly became more and more of our problem, right? And affecting the way we live our lives right here. So you have this process where things, you know about it, and you have all the information, but it doesn't affect your day-to-day life. Why? Because it's not your problem. In other words, you know about it, you understand, let's say, you could even understand the severity of it, but your day-to-day life is not yet being disrupted. Why? Because it's not here yet. And then there comes a point in time when now you can't get toilet paper. I mean, now it's affecting you. Right? Now you got to make a plan. To whatever extent you have to make a plan or choose to make a plan, but now it's hit, now it's here. That is very simple. That is not that you know it better or you understand it better. Bina, you've already understand it. A to Z, you get it. That is, it's real. That is, it's personal. That is, it's not somebody else's issue, or what you know is not detached from your experience. That is where you and what you know assume the same space. In Bina, there's two spaces, two domains. There's you and what you know, and they're not coexisting in that same space. Chachma for sure is a different space. Chachma is you have an idea about something, a flash of insight about something, but it's very much detached from you. You're conceiving of it, but it's detached. Bina is you really get it, so there is a connection, but there's still a distance between you and what you're understanding. You are not what you're understanding. Like I've said many times, the story of Bertrand Russell, who once said, as he was an ethicist, a moralist, and he was doing something not so moral, and he was called out on it, and he said, yes, but I also teach trigonometry, and I'm not a triangle. So the point is, right, what you know, or what you understand, and the knower and the understander, you and your mind, don't necessarily exist in the same space. You can know about triangles, but you're not a triangle. Right? You can understand about coronavirus, COVID-19, you can understand it, but it hasn't hit. It's not in your space. And then there's a moment that is where you and what you know become fused into one. And you exist in the space of what you know, and what you know exists in the space of who you are. The classic example given in Hasidic philosophy, in Jewish mysticism, is the example of the poor farmer who was illiterate and couldn't read, and every day somebody would read him a letter. I think I've said this. I think I said this a few weeks ago in this class. And every day somebody would read him his mail. And one day a fellow reads him a letter that tells the farmer that his father had passed away. And he faints. And this is used as an example. And so the Hasidic masters, the mystics, would ask the rhetorical question, why is it that only the farmer fainted and not the person reading the letter? It was the same information, and he got it first. The one who read the letter knew about the father's passing before the farmer heard it, and the answer is because it wasn't his father. It was the farmer's father. So he fainted.
Because he has these emotions.
Because it was real to him. Because it wasn't just a story about somebody else passing away. It was the farmer's father. So Bina is, you understand it, but it's about something or someone else. Bina is full understanding, full awareness of something, but it's not your issue. It's somebody else's. It's somewhat detached from you. You're understanding it, but there's you and what you understand, and it's not in the same, and those two parties are not in the same space. That is what you understand. What you know is now intertwined with who you are. Again, in the example that I gave, when the farmer hears the news that his father has passed away, it's not knowing something about somebody else, it's knowing something about himself. And that unlocks the full suite of emotions, including grief, loss, mourning, etc. That's what unlocks the emotions. So what unlocks emotions? It's when what we know becomes close to us, becomes very real.
I think, and I'm thinking of another example, which is not a Kabbalistic, but I'm thinking about the way in which we think about medicine and medical practitioners, that for so long it was, you have to sort of operate, you can't get too emotionally involved.
Right.
So you have to be able to look at something as objectively as you can and be able to explain. And that supposedly if it becomes personal, then you're not as much. But there's been a lot
Right.
of controversy in there because it
Don't
takes
get
that
attached to your
humanity.
patients. Don't get
Right,
emotionally
but
attached.
then you become a physician more so than a healer,
Right.
and that doesn't necessarily. But I think is that sort of around that you're supposed to operate at this much more higher cognitive level, but not engage the emotions in doing that, versus somebody who is able to sort of create that balance that I do feel that, but yet I'm still able to separate and be. Is that making any sense?
Yeah, for sure.
It's
no. I understand.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
it's like you can know about human suffering.
Mm-hmm.
You can know about atrocities that are happening around the world, and you can know it, and you can have all the data and all the information. You can have it intellectually. But what do you do at night? You go to sleep, and you don't lose any sleep over it. Why? Because it didn't hit here.
Yeah.
It's strictly intellectual. So in the realm of Bina, there's nothing lacking. Full Bina. Full understanding of the problem. So why aren't you doing anything about it? Because I don't care. Why don't you care? Because it's not my problem. I can understand the problem without it being my problem. I'm not saying this is a good thing, by the way.
Yeah.
I'm not at all saying
Yeah.
it's a good thing. But that's where Bina, that's where intellect gets its reputation as being cold and detached.
So it also
It could be cold and detached because, by definition, the goal at least is to, as much as possible, objectively understand that thing. It's not about you, it's about understanding that thing. So I can understand that thing and that thing and that thing from today to tomorrow, and it's not here. And as you said, in the medical field, that's been seen as a virtue. Because if I'm too emotionally attached, then maybe I'm going to miss something in the diagnosis. Maybe I'll be hesitant to tell the person what they really need to do because I care too much. But look, I think today we have turned the corner, and I think we understand that when it comes to healing, not just medicine, but when it comes to healing, we have to take a holistic approach. Because
that's
because you have to, because that's what we have.
Is that also the difference between sympathy and empathy?
Which Chacham and Bina?
If you're the
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I would,
yeah.
Yeah, Bina, you could be sympathetic because you know about it,
Right.
but that is where you're empathetic. It's where you're feeling it.
Yeah.
You're actually feeling that same space. Can I give you the, let's pass these around. Yeah?
Yeah.
Oh, you have it? Okay. Okay. Pleasure. Okay, so again, I just want to emphasize this idea because I think it's very powerful. That to transition into the emotional state, to wake up the emotions, requires us to move what we know into something that's a little bit more real, which, by the way, is the key to meditation. Because the idea, which we're talking about right now in our class, because the idea of meditation is to think about something in our minds to the point that we begin to feel. But here's the trick. You're not going to feel unless it's real. That's why, for example, in chapter 12, when we have the God meditation, or more precisely, the creation meditation, about, wow, this incredible magic trick of existence where, everything is created as something from nothing. So there's this gulf between the somethingness of the world and the nothingness of beyond creation, and yet the creator and the creative force is intimately intertwined with all of existence. So you have, on the one hand, the unbridgeable gap, and on the other hand, the greatest closeness and intimacy ever. So, and you have this confluence of paradox, and it's incredible. All of that, you can know it, you can understand it, be enough from today to tomorrow, and it's not going to affect the way you feel. Until it becomes real, until somehow it moves from being about a concept to being about me and in my life. How I might be dealing with my own anxieties or fears or whatever it is in life, and how I feel that God can do anything because God is so much bigger than any of this. And how even though God is so much bigger, God chooses to be right here with me. And once it hits on a personal level, then it can trigger the emotions. But as long as it's about the cosmology or spiritual cosmology of the universe, as long as it's that, it's not necessarily going to trigger an emotion. Because I can learn about the beauty of trigonometry, and I don't feel like being a triangle. I can learn about the cosmology of the universe through the mystical lens of Kabbalah, and it might not stir me or move me to pray or to do another mitzvah, to do a good deed. The key is that. That is the key. We have to move. Whenever we're talking about meditation, spiritual understandings, it's always important to move it from a theory or a concept, like an academic course, Kabbalah 101, here's how everything happened and came about to be, to move it into a space of, this is talking about me. This is my life. When I feel like I'm in a situation, when I feel stuck somewhere, then I can pull upon these ideas and say, number one, God is bigger than my problem. So God's not stuck in my problem. And number two, God is with me in this situation. And that's one way to move that meditation, the creation meditation, into our lives. And if it works for you, it works for you. If not, then you can find your own method. But the point is that to move it from a theory of this is how the universe works into something personal, this is speaking about my life. That's when it moves from Bina to Dat, and that's the shot that we have to make it real, to make it emotional. By the way, that's why the color coding is blue and red. Blue is typically, at least with the water, right? The blue is cold and red is hot. Intellect is cold. Why? It's a little bit detached. It's a little bit theoretical, right? It's a little bit abstract. Even if it's, even if I understand it well, it's still not me. Emotions are where I'm at. Emotions are passionate. It's about passion. I think that you need a balance always between the intellect and the emotions. It's interesting. In yesterday's Torah portion, read around the world, it talked about the construction of the tabernacle, the first temple, the first Jewish temple. Not the one of stone built by Solomon in Jerusalem, but the one built by Moses and the Jewish people in the wilderness after leaving Egypt. And that was built by individuals, says the Bible, says the Torah, who were chachmei lev. They were wise of heart. That's the phrase that's used. They were wise of heart, wise-hearted.
And to spell in the...
It says, well, chachmei lev, or chacham lev. C-H, cha, a, cha, C-H, chacham, A-M.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Where I say
I did a little
C-H.
cha. Chacham. So C-H-A,
C-H.
cha-A-M.
Oh, another A, and then M.
Yeah. Chacham.
You could learn yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like Seinfeld.
It is like Seinfeld.
That's
Lev
right,
and
that's
L
the first word.
and L-E-V. That's easy.
L-E-V.
Chacham lev, which means wise of heart. Chacham is like chachma, right?
Wise,
It's wisdom, right? It's wise, and lev is heart,
Heart.
emotions.
So it's wise of heart.
Wise of heart.
Where's
Why?
the of?
It's
You stick it in.
yeah. It's the beauty of Hebrew. It's
Okay.
so minimalistic. So chacham lev is translated as wise-hearted, which doesn't make sense in English, because who says that? If you open up a translation of the Torah, if I'm looking at the bookshelves here, if you open up the translation, you'll see it's going to translate it as wise-hearted, wise-hearted. The people that constructed the Mishkan, the tabernacle, were wise-hearted. Wise-hearted, it sounds poetic, but what does it actually mean? Wise-hearted. What does it mean? They had brains in their heart? They had hearts in their brains? You know what it really means? They had a balance between the intellect and the emotions. And the message is, if you want to build a home for God, we're not living in the ancient wilderness. Right? That era is not our era. But we're all trying to build a home for God. We're all trying to build a space for something greater in our lives. Right? And the question is, how do we build that? And the answer is, be a chacham lev. It's great to clear the throat, but it's also important to understand what it means. Right? Be wise-hearted. Have the intellect and have the emotion. Have a balance between somebody just posted something on Facebook that's very interesting about the liver. You actually need three things: the brain, the heart, and the liver. You gotta have a little liver. I'll explain what that means. Thank you, Moshe. Here, huh? No, maybe that was on YouTube. Did I say Facebook? No, I meant YouTube.
YouTube.
I'm just like, sorry, platforms. I didn't mean to mix y'all up. Somebody just posted clear-throated.
Yeah.
Chachmei lev is clear-throated.
Yeah.
So, yeah, these comments are fantastic. So here's the deal. Let me first speak about wise-hearted, and then we'll introduce the liver into this. We'll get the liver going also. So wise-hearted means that you have a good balance between intellect and emotion. You have people that are very intellectual, but when it comes to emotions, they can't connect. Right? So that's a little bit slanted more toward the intellect. Then you have emotional people that can't see things clearly, or can't, don't have the maybe more objective way of understanding. A good balance is where you chachmei lev or chacham lev, where you have the wisdom, but you also have the heart. You're able to see it and also able to connect emotionally. And I'm saying all of this to bolster your point. In other words, the idea of holistic healing is about not only being able to see things clearly and objectively, but also caring about the other person. That's why the Lubavitcher Rebbe always said, whenever somebody asked him about advice, for a blessing, for health, somebody's facing, a medical decision, surgery, not surgery, this course of action, that course of action, people would write, I cannot tell you how many thousands and tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of letters. At some point, the Rebbe got more letters than the President of the United States. So, in Brooklyn, New York, in Crown Heights. So, the Rebbe was asked And why did people write? When they were going through typically difficult times. People didn't write to say to the rabbi saying, hey, everything's going great, just wanted you to know. People wrote when they were going through a crisis. That's the way it is. So the Rebbe got crisis after crisis, agony after agony, heart-wrenching letter after heart-wrenching letter. And many of them were about health. I can't say most. I believe probably most, but definitely a very large amount of the letters the Rebbe got were about health-related issues. Now, the Rebbe wasn't a doctor, but he was giving spiritual advice and blessings. The Rebbe would say many, many times, when you're faced with a medical decision, but like a real medical decision, always get a second opinion, number one. And number two, if at all possible, get an opinion from a Rofei Yedid, which is Hebrew for a doctor, a Rofei, a doctor, who is a Yedid, who is a friend. Find a doctor who you know, even if they're not a specialist in that area. Why? Not to make the decision, but to consult. Why? Because they care. Because you have the lev, now you have the heart. So you need also the objective expert, etc. But sometimes, without the heart, that's also overlooking something. When you care about the person who you're treating, when you care about them, when they're not just a patient with a file, but they're your friend, they're a human being, they're a person, you care about them, you might see something that you would otherwise miss. And you're that much more invested to go a little bit more, to go the extra mile, to do another test or one more option or one more thing than you might not do if you didn't have that connection. And so it was spiritual advice, but also very practical advice. Consult with a doctor who knows you and cares about you and loves you. You got to make your choice, but have options and consult specifically with a Rofi, with a doctor who's a friend. The point here is when you're creating an edifice for God, when you're creating a home, a space, Chacham Lev, you need to have a convergence, a confluence. You need to have this duality of both the intellect and the emotions. So somebody wrote, again on the comments here, that the Hebrew word for king, Melech, is an acronym for three words. So in the Hebrew, again, Melech, there are three letters in Hebrew, Mem, Me, Le, Lamed, Le, and Chaf. Melech. Mem, Lamed, Chaf. Those are the three consonants. The Mem, the Me of Melech of King, stands for Moach, which is brain. The Lamed stands for Lev, which is heart. And the Ch stands for, or the Ka, well, it's a Ch or Ka, depending on how you vowelize it, it stands for Kaved, which means liver. So you need a king, someone who's in control, has the mind, the brain, the heart, and the liver. A good combination, a good trifecta. What's the mind, heart, liver triad, if you will? So the mind, we know, is the intellect, the heart is the emotion, and the liver is the ability that we have to make the decisions that we need to do and have the strength to see them through. Like a practical way forward. So you need the ideas, you need the emotions, and then you need the fortitude to see something through, which is not like the guts. Kishkas, liver, whatever. It's in the same vicinity.
The liver is the only, as I'm understanding, the only organ that regenerates on its own. You remove part of the liver if it grows.
Right, the lobe of liver, yeah.
How do you spell that in English? King, Melech.
M-E-L-E-C-H.
Okay.
But remember, in Hebrew, you don't have the vowels, so the E's you would drop.
Yeah.
So you would have the consonants are the M, the L, and the Ch, which is the kaved, the liver. Again, it's an acronym for somebody who has on all three levels, somebody who's in control on all three levels. A king, a real leader, is somebody who has the intellectual objectivity, who has the emotional connection, and who has the fortitude to see something through. So all three are very important to get stuff done.
Like you.
It's not about me. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Can you, even though
Yeah.
it's not a PSA, this is Chabad.
This is Chabad.
Where the name comes from.
Chachma, Bina, and Dat is exactly Chabad. Why is Chabad called Chabad? Because the founder of Chabad, what he taught, like his bread and butter teaching, the whole philosophy of Chabad is based on one simple truth. And that is that the way anything happens and the way any change happens, positive change, is by carefully and mindfully attuning and using and utilizing our Chachma, Bina, and Dat. When we have that in order, correct, when that is situated in the way that it needs to be, in the way that's a healthy way, then everything follows suit. The emotions are healthy, and the liver is healthy, both physically and spiritually, right? Everything is the way it needs to be, and it doesn't mean we don't have work to do in the other areas, but that's the key to starting it off. It's like the Alter Rebbe asks, the founder of Chabad asks in his seminal work, the book of Tanya, he says, and again, I may have mentioned this in a previous class, maybe even last week. I don't remember if I mentioned this or not. He says, how do you have in the Bible a commandment to love the Lord your God? How do you love? How do you command to love? And he explains the commandment is not the emotion, it's the meditation. The commandment is to think about the things that will get you to that space of love. Which means that basically everything, the emotions, which then leads to what we do and how we are in this world, it's all led by the mind. So with that in mind, let's jump back into our text, because we have a lot of really, really great things to get to. Because we're talking right now about this very process, the process of meditation. Copy? Let's pass this down. Thank you very much. So let's talk about... Huh? Oh, two? Yeah. Sure. Let's talk about the meditation that we are right now involved in. Make sure that's the right one. That was two? Okay. It felt thicker than the other.
Chapter 12?
It starts in chapter 12, but we're right now in the middle of chapter 13.
Oh, okay.
Okay? Chapter 13. Wait, I'm sorry.
You have that one, yeah.
Huh? You don't have chapter 13?
I do, yeah.
Yeah, we are in the middle of chapter 13.
Okay.
Just a reference on the page number. We're on page 26. We're on page 26. Middle of 26. But I want to reset some things because it's important that we're all on the same page as we get rolling here in the text inside. Chapter 12 and chapter 13. The chapter that we did a few weeks ago and the chapter that we're in right now, these two chapters are the meditation chapters. And the meditation chapters really focus on two completely different meditations. The book that we're studying, somebody's asking online, which book are we studying? It's called, the original text is called Hecholzu. It's a discourse from the 5th Chabad Rebbe, the Rebbe Rashab. And in the English, the book is called On Ahavas Yisrael. I'll post in the link on YouTube. After the class, I'll post a link to get the text, to read the text online. At this point, the book is out of print. I've been in touch with the publisher to help with the reprinting of the book. Some of you may know this, that I've been involved in publishing Kabbalistic texts. Over a dozen texts I've worked on annotating, translating, and bringing to light in English. So this was translated and published a few decades ago, but it needs a bit of an update, and I've already reached out to the publisher, and it looks like hopefully we'll have a little bit of a collaboration on that. But that's an aside. But in the YouTube comments, I'm going to post a link to be able to read this online to follow. So it's not going to help for right now, because I can't do it right now in the middle of the class, but we'll do it right afterwards. Okay, so chapters 12 and 13 are the meditation chapters. And they basically and essentially are presenting two completely different types of meditations. One meditation is on the greatness of God and the closeness of God. which we said is the duality, the magic duality of our relationship with God. How God is so infinitely vast and beyond us, and yet intimately close with us. That was chapter 12. Chapter 13 is the introspective meditation. It's about breaking our hearts open a little bit. It's about self-breaking of the heart, right? And we explained last week that sometimes it's possible for a person's heart to become a little bit cold and a little bit indifferent. And maybe we can even use the words, the modern terms, cynical, right? We might become a little bit cynical. We hear something, whatever, it's not going to affect me. Maybe it's because we want to protect ourselves. Maybe it's because, we've been burned before when we've been open emotionally. Or maybe it's just because we've become accustomed to things the way they are, and we stop getting emotionally charged up by everything that happens. But it's possible also that this can affect our spiritual lives as well. That when something truly inspiring happens around us, we don't get inspired as we should. So for example, when something amazing happens in our lives and a blessing occurs to us, it's possible that a person will say, I had it coming, or whatever, no big deal. I'm happy that it happened, but but not feel that gratitude and not really feel that emotional openness and connection. It's possible also that a person will do something that they shouldn't be doing, and they know they shouldn't be doing it, but not really feel so bad about it. Whatever, this is who I am, I'm not perfect, whatever. And I would say a lot of that happens with repeated. They say the first time you cross a line, it's very, very scary. The second time, less scary. Already with repetition, it becomes what line? I don't remember there being a line here, right? It becomes normal. But on some level, a person knows maybe that it's a self-destructive behavior, let's say, but yet it becomes more normalized. So the question is, in all of these examples and many more, is there a way to reclaim our heart, our emotional connection? Whether it's feeling the right amount of awe and gratitude, or feeling the right amount of contrition, or feeling bad about something, or feeling empathetic, whatever it is. If the heart feels a little bit stuck, so what is the advice? And again, going back to our chart here, the chart of Sfirot, which I'll put, having a hard time figuring out how this works. There we go. My directions are a little bit mirrored here. So when we're talking about this chart, sometimes things can get stuck in the head. Chachma bina dat can get stuck in the head and not move down to the emotions. And a person might say, I'm chachmaing, to the best of my ability, and I'm binaing, and I'm even trying to dat as well. I've dotted all my I's and crossed all my T's, and it's still not working. I'm not feeling anything. And I explained last week, part of it is because, if you look, there's a biological symbolism of the fact that the neck that connects head and heart, or head and torso, the neck is skinnier. In traffic, when you have a 6-lane highway that's reduced down to 1 lane, what do we call that?
Congestion.
Atlanta. No, I'm kidding. No, we're not kidding. No, what do we call that? Congestion, right? We also call that a bottleneck, because you're taking something that's broad and narrowing it down, and even if it gets broad again, that process of narrowing down, it creates a lot of havoc. And sometimes people are going to turn around and I'm just not going to deal with that traffic. And it's possible that because of the strictures that exist, not only biologically, physically with the neck, but Kabbalistically and mystically and spiritually, within the soul's cosmology, within the soul's construct, it's possible that some ideas and some notions that we have don't end up going through the narrow space into the heart. It's the bottleneck. So, sorry about that. So, that is where the meditation of introspection comes in. Because it says in Zohar, it says in the primary work of Kabbalah, that just as it is, and we said this last week, just as it is with a big log of wood, that if it doesn't catch on fire, the solution is to chop it down. The same thing is true in our lives. When we find ourselves being unable to be inspired emotionally by what we know, we're thinking, we're knowing, we're reading, we're studying, we're meditating, but the heart is not getting it. We're not feeling it. When a person feels that they're not feeling, what's the advice? Mivachenle, chop it down. No axe is necessary. How do you chop? So when it comes to a log, and you want to catch it, you want to create a bonfire, you need to catch it on fire, so we know. You take little small pieces of wood, so you take a larger piece of wood, cut it down, splinters, right, kindling, light that on fire, and then you'll eventually catch a log. What does it mean for the heart? What do? So the advice is to meditate on meditate on our imperfections. And when we meditate on our imperfections, that opens the heart a little bit. And once the heart is open and a little bit broken, self-induced, now we become a little bit more sensitive, and the ideas can start taking root in the heart. That's the idea that we presented last week. And so the advice is to meditate, not on the greatness of God in the universe, and not on the closeness of God within me and within the universe, but on my distance from where I need to be, on the things that I've done that have hurt myself and others, and my connection with God in the process. Meditate on all of the things that I've done that have taken me away from my purpose, taken me away from where I need to be personally and spiritually. And through that process, become a little bit more sensitive, a little bit more open. As we mentioned a few weeks ago, the Kutzker Rebbe said, there's nothing as whole as a broken heart. What does it mean? It means that where is a human being really human? It's when their heart is a little bit broken, i.e. a little bit open and sensitive. And as I said at the end of last week's class, we shouldn't wait for life to do that to us, God forbid, but we should do that proactively ourselves. Sometimes life has a way of breaking us open and making us feel vulnerable and making us feel raw and real. But why wait, God forbid, for something of a negative nature to happen to induce that? Kabbalah says that we should do that ourselves proactively as part of our spiritual striving and spiritual service. So again, we're about to jump in on page 26 in our text. I'm going to read this out loud. But I do want to mention the first two paragraphs, we're all talking about meditating on the things that we've done that haven't been so, let's say, again, colloquially, that haven't been so kosher, number one. And number two, the things that we have done that were positive deeds, that were, let's say, a mitzvah, but weren't done in the proper fashion. Like, I did it, but I didn't really do it in the best way. I didn't really connect with it. Or my meditation, as I was doing it, wasn't the way it needed to be. Let's continue now, middle of 26. He says, this is particularly true when one meditates on the greatness and exaltedness of God. And now he brings back the idea of the greatness of God into this meditation. In comparison with this, i.e., the greatness and exaltedness of God, even genuine service has no value. And let me explain that phrase, has no value. It doesn't mean it really has no value. Obviously, if God wants us to have a relationship with Him, and we're doing what we can, so that has value. But what it means here, and this, I'm not really happy with this translation, not that it doesn't have value, but that it pales in comparison with how we should be serving God. In other words, if God is truly infinite, so what would serving an infinite God really look like? And then think about how we end up serving God. Even if it's to the best of our ability, how far lower is that than what God truly deserves as somebody serving Him? That's really the meditation here. How and he's going to give an example of a king and serving a king, and he's going to give more of a human example of this, an analogy or a parable. But it's important to understand this in the original and understand what those words really mean and how it can be misconstrued in that translation. What it means is, the more we recognize how infinite and how exalted and how transcendent and how perfect and how pure and how beyond any of these descriptions God truly is, the more we recognize how there's nothing that we could do that would ever truly do justice to who and what God is. And that should humble us a little bit, which is the point of this meditation. So let's jump back inside. Indeed, it is likened to sin. And again, let me explain this. What he's saying here is serving God relative to who God is like a sin. Doesn't mean it literally, obviously. You're doing something good and not something bad. But what it means is relative to who and what God is and to what type of service God truly deserves, so to speak. What we do is like a pittance. It's like bupkis. How do you translate bupkis? It's like nothing. It's garnished. It's nothing.
A tiny dot.
It's nothing. But compared to someone who deserves something big, a nothing is a little bit of a chutzpah. It's a little bit of it's not so nice. Obviously, it's not actually sin. It's a good thing that we're doing. It's all within that safe space of this meditation. And it's not about anyone else, it's about ourselves. Right? It's like a sin. In other words, it's falling short of where we ought to be. Let's continue. Here he gives the example. For example, serving a great king in a manner that does not befit his stature is considered demeaning. Now, you and I don't have a good, solid dot of what it means to have a king. We can have a bina, theoretical understanding of what it might be to live, under a monarchy. But the author of this text lived under a monarchy. This is from Russia, right? The time of the Tsar. When you're living under a monarchy, it's a different reality. It's not a democracy. It's a different reality. And for many generations, the Kabbalists had this tool of parable at their disposal. The idea of the king-subject relationship. And it's something that as soon as you mentioned it, everyone in the room got it. I was like, oh yeah, I get that. Makes total sense. Because they lived with that. For us in 2020, it's like, sort of, we can imagine maybe what it might be like, but we're not living it. We're understanding it theoretically and trying to pretend what would it be like if we would live under that, but it's still detached. So when the Bolshevik Revolution happened in the 19 teens, what was it, 1918, 16, 14, 17, somewhere in there, right? 1917. And the czars fell and communism rose. When that happened, the mystics lamented, "Oh, we're losing this. We're losing the. No one's going to understand this anymore. We're losing the parable." And I don't think if you're in England it counts. I don't think that constitutional monarchy means the same thing. It doesn't mean the same thing, right? I mean, I know there are countries in the world that still have monarchies and whatever. But this is not a discussion whether the monarchy is good or bad. This is not the same conversation. But it's just simply about this. when you live with a king who has that absolute power, like the power of life and death, so then when you're standing in front of that king, how you act, how you breathe, how you talk is important. And one move could be life or death. You with me on this? It's not like, whatever, more or less, we're on the same page. There's no more or less here. You're standing in front of the king. It's not, this is game time. The king is right there. Again, we can imagine this. I'll speak for myself. I can imagine this, but I'm not living this. So it's harder can't relate. We can talk about relating to it and imagine and like daydream about it, but this is the example that he's giving. Imagine a king, not a bad king, not a despot, not a terrible, horrific, murderous king. A king who is of a very exalted stature, but also at the same time means business, right? A king is a king. You don't waste the king's time. So imagine a king. And imagine you're a servant of the king. And imagine you're serving the king in a way that doesn't befit the king's stature. Not only are you not optimizing or are you achieving that type of service that you should, but it's actually a slap in the face. It's actually demeaning. It's actually insulting to the king if you are not serving the king the way the king deserves to be served. That's the example that he's given. Again, can you and I relate to it on a visceral level? No. Can we imagine? Yeah, we can imagine. So that's what we're asked to do here. We're not asked, but that's the parable that's given. So again, let's get back into this example. For example, serving a great king in a manner that does not befit his stature is considered demeaning. For each kind of service must be appropriate to the station, I don't like that word, of the one being served. In other words, when you're serving the other, it should be in appropriate measure to the one who's being served. The service offered to a simple person cannot be compared with that given to a mighty king. Right? If you have guests at your house for dinner and you're bringing out soup, so there's a way that you bring out the bowl of soup and put it down in front of your guest. Obviously you don't spill it on them, correct? That's bad form. There's a way that you bring out the food and you serve it to your guests at home. That's not the same way that you serve a king. It's not the same thing. What, I didn't spill it on the king's lap. It's a different way. You don't serve the king the same way you serve your guests. It doesn't... What's the point? The point is that when you're involved in avodah, when you're involved in service, you have to serve relative and commensurate to the way that person deserves to be served. That's the way it is. The service offered to a simple person cannot be compared with that given to a mighty king. And if offered to the king, it would be considered sinful and rebellious. The same type of service that would be considered to be an honorable way of serving an ordinary person is considered to be sinful and rebellious relative to the king. It's not about what you're doing, it's about who you're doing it for. And who you're doing it for is going to inform how you ought to be doing it. That's the mathematical formula. Again, and if offered to the king, it would be considered sinful and rebellious, for it demeans his honor. The reality is that the king, the great king and the mighty king and the exalted king deserves a certain level of service. And if you're not serving on that level, it's considered to be not nice. It's not a nice service. I'm trying to think of a good example here in our own lives. Look, there's a way Let's talk about our loved ones. There's a way in which we treat strangers, right? Respectfully and honorably. But there's a way in which we should treat our family and our loved ones, those closer to us, with an even greater measure of honor. Sometimes it works the other way around, right? Where we take, no, but that's a challenge that we have, right? Because familiarity breeds, well, contempt is the way that usually
Nobody
finishes.
does it to you
But,
like your family.
right, that's exactly. No one knows which buttons to push. No, but like sometimes it's easier to hold the door open for the stranger at the coffee shop than a loved one, because you see them every day and you're always interacting. But ideally, the way you treat others with love, honor, respect, etc., should be lower than the way you treat those closer with you. Not because they're better or worse, just because on some level, the closer it is, the more of that is appropriate. It's just the way it is. I'm thinking about, there's in Jewish law, so when it comes to a wedding, it's very interesting. So the bride and groom are both, when they walk to the chuppah, to the Jewish marriage canopy, so they're both escorted by family members, usually parents. If the parents are still alive, they're escorted. And one of the reasons for why they're escorted is because on their wedding day, they're considered to be a king and a queen. And a king and a queen, they don't walk anywhere without being escorted. Because the kings don't walk alone. There's always a procession involved. So there's a procession by the wedding because it's like a king and a queen. And even after the wedding, in Jewish tradition, for 7 days, the bride and the groom, husband and wife, don't walk anywhere by themselves. They don't walk alone. There's always someone to walk with them. Again, that honor of being a king and a queen. So there was once a young man before his wedding who was speaking with his rabbi about the various things that he needs to know about the Jewish wedding and marriage and married life and all that stuff. And so he asks his teacher, his rabbi, he says, so how long am I a king for? And so what was the answer? As long as you treat your wife as a queen. That's as long as you're a king. And yeah, those closest to us we should treat as royals, right? That's the goal. That's the ideal, right? I mean, that's the goal that we strive toward. Bring it back to our discussion here. The way you serve an ordinary person, right? An ordinary civilian is going to be different than the way you serve a king. If you were living in a time if you were living under a monarchy, if we were living under a monarchy, we would get this without any need for explanation. It would be, yeah, obviously. Yeah, who even thinks? And it wouldn't even be a question of, well, is that right? Do we like hierarchy? It's just a reality. And so what he's saying is, the same thing is true, we can meditate on our relationship with God. How do we serve God? Like we serve others? Like we're doing God a favor by doing a mitzvah? Right? It's like, God, I'm going to throw you a bone. I'm going to be nice to someone today. Hook me up with something while we're at it. Like, I'll do this, you do that. Is it like a human relationship or are we serving God from a space of reverence and a space of respect and a space of true exaltedness? That's the question. It's not a question for anybody else. This is all about an introspective process to make ourselves recognize that there's a long way to go. There's still a journey ahead of us, so that we become more open to then start feeling. Let's bring it back inside. Let's read it inside. The corollary of this analogy helps us understand our relationship with God in the face of His utterly unfathomable exaltedness. I love that line. In the face of God's utterly unfathomable exaltedness. That means that it's exaltedness that can't even be described. The truth is, we can't even describe it as being exalted, because that's also a label and a definition. It's beyond definitions, even beyond the definition of being beyond definition. So in the face of this great and undefined God, even, look at this line, even the service of the loftiest tzaddikim, righteous person, bears no proportion whatever. Again, that translation doesn't necessarily make sense in English, but means it pales in comparison with what God should be getting, if you will. Not that God's demanding, but even the greatest tzaddik, even the most perfect righteous human being, serving God doesn't really hit the level of the service that God deserves based on God's greatness. Consequently, yeah.
What do we reference that, or what's the reference that tells us that God, without personifying God, but that God wants to be revered in that way or served?
It's not about God. Whoops. No, no, it's not.
I'm
no,
going
but
home.
no, it's not about God.
Yeah.
It's about us.
Ah.
Even if God doesn't ask for it, how do we not have that reference? It's not about God being petty and saying, "Oh, I deserve this." That's not what it's about. It's about us being truly awed and truly aware of God's greatness, and then asking ourselves the question, am I serving God the way God deserves to be served? Not because he demands it. Not because he's the petty king that says, I need to be served this way, you brought me the meal, it's cold, and you didn't bow down the right way, and therefore you're done. That's not who God is. That's not, and I hope that I didn't give that impression today. That's not who God is. But it's our meditation. If God is truly so, etc., right? Adjective or lack of adjective, because you can't even describe, right? Then my question is, am I serving God the way God really should be served, from my perspective?
I think this is where the analogy is tricky, because a king assumes that this is the way you're supposed to serve me. This is what you should do.
And it's ego-driven.
Yes.
Could be ego-driven.
But
right.
But using that as an analogy here, that's where I think I was getting confused, because that's not my understanding.
It makes sense, 100%. No, I understand. His point is, just like if you were living under a monarchy, you would never come to the king in a way and say, more or less, I serve the king. It wouldn't be. It's a life and death. You wouldn't play that game. If there's a way the king deserves to be honored and served, our meditation should be that, or the question we can ask ourselves is, are we serving God the way God deserves to be served? In a way that befits, yeah.
I think, that it's benefiting us more than it's benefiting God.
Right.
I think that's what you're
yes.
saying, right?
It's about us.
That it's like they've done research on this, like when you show gratitude towards situations, it helps you tremendously. It's been considered to be almost like a cure for dissatisfaction,
right,
to a certain extent.
Right.
So when you're that grateful towards God, it actually makes you happy.
Right.
So I think God wants you to be grateful towards Him, so that way you're at your maximum level of happiness.
Correct.
And then also too, through your faith, faith is like a surrender to God, kind of. And when you're surrendering in that way, I think you're like increasing the conductivity of God's energy to be able to come to you.
Right.
It's like Ohm's law. Like the more you lower the resistance, the more power can go through. So I think the whole point is to benefit your own happiness, your own ability to love other people. You become a better conduit for God's love.
Very well said.
Yeah,
very well said.
Yeah, thank you.
Like the Rebbe once told somebody that a mitzvah, we say we do a mitzvah for God, it's really benefiting ultimately us.
Right. Absolutely.
Not that God's not present in the equation,
yeah,
but that God is not a petty dictator demanding to be served and saying, and if not, blah blah blah. It's really about our best interest.
Yeah,
it's saying,
absolutely.
if you want to live an optimized life, this is the best way to do it.
So I think to capture that though in the text, I think that makes sense. there's something missing between the analogy and then this, to go right from the analogy to
Right.
therefore, because I think
that's
what
what
you're
we're-
describing gets lost in that.
Because what you're saying is really accurate, because a king is kind of a haughty person,
Yeah.
and it's
Yeah.
like you need to do this, and it's more
Yeah.
about serving that person,
Right.
And it's like almost like you're debasing yourself for that person to
Mhm.
a certain
Yeah.
extent, and that's
Correct.
kind of, I don't think that's what
That's not the intention, right? That's not the intention. It's more of understanding the simple equation of the greater an entity is, the higher level you have to step up what you're doing.
Right.
In the case of God, it's infinite greatness,
Yeah.
or whatever, right? Infinitely beyond, and therefore it deserves, or the right thing would be an infinite level of service, which a human being is not capable of. And his point here is not even like step up your game. His point is that this could be used as a meditation within oneself, right? To come to the realization that no matter how great I am, no matter how plugged in I am, I'm still not where I really need to be. And there's still a lot more work that I can do spiritually to connect with an infinite God.
But even if I could clarify that, where I need to be has an endpoint. So I think of this as it's infinite in terms of where you can be. That
Right.
you may be working towards a benchmark, something here, but it's not an endpoint.
Correct.
Ultimately,
Right.
there's always a furtherness to
Right.
it.
Right, and that's exactly what he says here.
Yeah.
Because look at the next line.
Yeah.
He says, consequently, this is again just for point of reference, make sure everyone's on the same spot. So page 26, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 lines up with the last word, consequently. During the 10 days of penitence, which are the days between, from Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, through Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, those are 10 days. So Rosh Hashanah is the first day of the Hebrew month of Tishrei, and Yom Kippur is the 10th day of that month. So those 10 days are known as the 10 days of Teshuvah, or penitence, or repentance. So consequently, during the 10 days of penitence, even such a completely righteous man as Moshe Rabbeinu, has to recite the confessional prayers, which declare we have transgressed. He says, even a Moses, even the greatest Jewish leader that ever lived, a Moses, like the original, like OG Moses, like Moses of Moses' fame, from all the movies.
Did you say OG or emoji Moses?
No,
not
OG is like
Oh.
the original.
The original.
Oh, OG.
Like the original Moses, not like Moses the tailor, like Moshe from the shtetl. I mean Moses from the Bible.
Yeah,
Even Moses, during the 10 days of Teshuvah, would say the same prayers. Ashamnu, we transgressed. What, Moses transgressed? Not literally, but even Moses. Again, it's not us judging Moses, but Moses within himself. Could Moses himself say, I got this down? Like, there's no room for growth? Like, I'm at the end point, like, achieved, level unlocked, like, I'm done with this like achievement, No. Even Moses says we have transgressed. Why? For considering God's true greatness and majesty, even true service is likened to sin. Again, not actually sin. You should know the word sin here in Hebrew is chet. And chet, although it's translated as sin, literally here is translated as sin, chet in Hebrew means lacking. It means when you're lacking something. It means when there's a gap between where you are and where you ought to be. That lack, that gap is called a chet. So it's less than. And so even Moses would say Ashamnu, Bagadnu, Gazalnu, right? All the confessional prayers. Why? Not because of literal sin, but even divine service of Moses relative to God's infinite stature is considered to be lacking somewhat, because again, it's not because God's petty and demanding, but it's because a human being can't really get to that place.
Yeah.
Just can't. This concept, there's brackets now, this concept is alluded to in the comment of our sages on the verse. Oh, I love this. This is fantastic. This right here, put on your fridge. This concept is alluded to in the comment of our sages on the verse. Okay, here's the verse. And Moses bowed to the ground and prostrated himself. Vayikoid arza vayishtachu. Or vayishtachavu. He bowed down to the ground and prostrated himself. In fact, this is from Exodus 34:8, which was in the Torah portion read yesterday around the world, in synagogues around the world. That Moses bows down when God, this is after the sin of the golden calf, and Moses is speaking to God. There's a big dialogue about forgiveness and atonement and all that stuff. And at some point it says, Moses bows down to the ground. And our sages say, why did Moses fall to the ground? And it says the answer is because he saw the attribute of truth. And how can you stand when you see that attribute of truth? And let me read this inside. They explain, this is the Talmud, you can look at the footnote, 61, Sanhedrin, Tractate Sanhedrin. Our sages explain that he bowed down, Moses bowed down because he saw God's midat ha'emet, God's attribute of truth. And who can stand before God's truth? That's why he fell down. So what happened? Moses saw God's truth, God's attribute of truth. And when he sees that, even Moses falls to the ground. Why? As my iPad falls to the ground. Why? Because who can stand in the face of truth? Truth with a capital T. In the face of God's truth, who can stand up and say, here I am. Count me in. Or I'm on board. I'm where I need to be. In the space of truth, of absolute truth, everything is false. Even the most sincere human being is not completely true relative to absolute truth. I'm thinking now of Platonic forms. When you talk about like the perfect tree, how every other tree is but an imperfect representation of tree. And how even that is not a proper analogy to this, because this is infinite. When you talk about infinite absolute truth, so any human attempt at truth is going to fail. We're not saying this to demean anybody. We're not putting down Moses here. The point is for us to use this for ourselves as a bit of a, I don't know, wake-up call, but a bit of a call to action to say, no matter what I've been doing, I'm not exactly where I need to be. There's a really powerful Hayom Yom. I'll explain what that is in a moment. So I'll explain what that is right now, actually. In the early 1940s, the Lubavitcher Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, this is before he officially became the leader of the Chabad Lubavitch movement, so he penned a daily calendar known as Hayom Yom. His first book. What he did was he took teachings, mystical teachings, and condensed them down to a thought, and put one for each day of the year. So you have like a calendar, like a daily thought. Like you have Lahavdil, you have the Far Side calendar with comics. Like every day, it's funny. Yeah, you have a calendar for each day. That was my attempt to laugh at it.
No pictures.
No, right. In the right. There's no pictures in this one. Although you could draw, but this is a thought, an inspirational thought, a mystical thought for each day. So one of the days, he has this idea. I wish I would have pulled it out.
Be good to do one like that, actually.
Yeah, but you don't want to rip it off and throw it away. Because I'll tell you the truth, the next year it's the same. I mean, there's only made one, so it's kind of the same. Yeah. Something where you can rotate it. That's actually a good idea. Okay, so I'm going to try to pull this out. And Hayom Yom. That's what it says in Hebrew. On the spine, Hayom Yom. Oh, you have a big one? Yeah. Hayom Yom. So it has an index. And so what we're going to do is, this is live, we're going to look up the word truth. Truth.
Is it capitalized in there?
In the index it is, but that's because all the headers are capitalized. Here we go. Truth as avoda. Okay, page 30, 20. Let's see what that is. Let's see what 3020 is. And this was the Hayom Yom, the daily thought for the 20th day of Adar. Just so you know, today is the 19th day of Adar. You know nothing happens by chance. This is already the second time this has happened in a few weeks. So this is the daily thought for tomorrow. You with me on this? Let me explain what's going on here. So we're talking about truth, and I'm telling you that there's a beautiful entry about the Rabbi in this Hayom Yom about truth, and we just looked it up, and it's actually for tomorrow. So we got it very close, timing-wise. Here's what it says. Avoda, translated as service and striving, is not the striving that the avoda itself be true. Rather, truth itself is an avoda. This is deep. The avoda is not that the avoda should be true, but truth itself is an avoda. Are you with me on this? Again, I'm reading from this, not in our book. I'm reading from this text, from the Hayom Yom, from tomorrow's inspirational point. Let me explain what that means. There's two ways to understand the pursuit of truth. One is that when I pray, I should pray from a place of truth and sincerity. That means that how I'm serving God, right? That I'm serving God with truth. He says that's not what it means. What it means is that truth itself is its own service. It's not just that whatever I do should be infused with truth. Truth is its own avoda. Truth is its own work to be true and sincere. Rather, truth itself is an avoda that the fingernails be true. This is an expression that even the fingernails should be through and through true. And then he says, rhetorically, why does that surprise you? Moses saw the attribute of truth, the Talmud declares, and he prostrated himself and he fell down to the ground. So again, it's the same Talmudic passage that's being quoted here. The point is that when it comes to truth, truth is awesome, and it's really an overawing experience. It's not a word, it's not a phrase right there. Overawed is overawing. I don't know if that's a real thing. Anyway, the point is that truth is powerful. And in the face of truth, who can truly stand? Even Moses couldn't stand when he saw the truth of God. Even Moses can't stand. The greatest tzaddik, the greatest righteous person, the human being cannot stand in the space of that absolute and perfect truth with a capital T. And so, in this text for the daily thought, it's how much we should work on, although we're never going to get to that place of truth, of absolute truth, but how important it is to work on the concept of truth and sincerity. Not that what we do is sincere, but that who we are is sincere and true and genuine. Not that when we do something or say something, it's true and sincere, but our very fingernails are true and sincere, which means it's through and through. It's who we are, not how we position ourselves, not how we express ourselves, but who we are inside. But that's a thought that we can explore more, and that's tomorrow's idea and tomorrow's meditation. But today, in the context of our discussion, it's about a meditation of where we are and our spiritual achievements. And a person might say, look, more or less I'm doing the right thing. And so I feel good. I'm doing the right thing. I'm a spiritual person. I'm a godly person. And I feel okay. And that's fine. But the problem is, at a certain point, the heart might be turned off. The heart might be cold. And if a person finds themselves that their heart has moved from the red to the blue, in other words, their heart is not on fire anymore, one way to go about this is through a meditation. A personal introspection meditation. To ask oneself the question, what am I doing that's not so kosher? What am I doing that is good, but that I'm not doing in the way that God really, that I ought to be doing it? Am I falling short in what I need to be doing? And these questions should open up the heart to be a little bit more open and therefore allow more light in. Let's continue. Let's finish off this chapter on page 27. Nevertheless, by the way, here he rescues us. Because so far it's like, we can't do anything right. So he rescues us right here on top of 27 in our text. But then he brings it back. Okay, you'll see what I mean. Nevertheless, God does not demand such a standard of each individual. In other words, God knows that we're not perfect, and we can't reach this level of absolute service and absolute truth. So God doesn't necessarily demand that of us, to your point. God doesn't demand this of us. There's a verse beginning when an ox or a sheep, which prescribes what may be offered as a sacrifice. On this, our sages comment, when God demands, he demands according to an individual's personal abilities. Since it is impossible for there to be an avoda commensurate with his true greatness, he asks only that each person's avoda be true according to his own abilities. In other words, God doesn't demand of us the impossible from God's perspective. Nevertheless, for us, periodically meditating upon this concept will bring about feelings of bitterness. Let me explain the word bitterness. Bitterness is not like we typically understand the word bitterness in English, which means that you're bitter about something, like something happened and you're angry about it. Bitterness it's not really a good translation. In the Hebrew, it's merirut, like marar, which is bitter herbs, but in English it doesn't work. In Hebrew it works, but in English it doesn't work. Merirut means dissatisfaction, not bitterness, but dissatisfaction with self. Like imagine you're an athlete and you're a top athlete. Imagine Michael Jordan. And Michael Jordan gets 60 points in a game. Can you imagine a guy who's competitive as Michael Jordan, who after the game looks at the film and self-critiques? Of course. That's why he's Michael Jordan, is because after a game that he scores 60 points, he's self-critiquing. And he's working harder and hitting the gym and shooting jump shots at 5 a.m. because he saw something that he could have done better. That's what we're talking about now. It's no matter how good we are, or how much we're doing spiritually, it's recognizing there's so much more that we could be doing. And there's so much more that for ourselves we ought to be doing. And it's not that anyone else is demanding it of us. It's that we are demanding it of ourselves. It's that we are dissatisfied. Instead of bitterness, that we're dissatisfied. That we're not satisfied with where we are because we know that we can go higher. And we know that that's the right thing, is to go higher. And surely so, let me start again from that sentence. Nevertheless, this is the middle of that paragraph, top paragraph 27. Nevertheless, although God's not demanding it of us, periodically meditating upon this concept will bring about feelings of inner dissatisfaction. And surely so, when one contemplates the fact that one's service is not even true in relation to one's own abilities. He says, relative to God's perfection and truth, certainly we're not where we need to be. But even relative to our potential, we can be honest with ourselves and tell ourselves and recognize that we're not where we need to be, even for ourselves with our own abilities. This applies particularly if extraneous thoughts occur to a person during his service, i.e. distracting thoughts and thoughts that take a person away from focusing and being fully present when a person is serving God, or if he finds aspects of his speech or action that are not in accordance with God's wishes. For these distance him utterly from God and therefore cause him to cry out bitterly through this meditation. So what in summation, what we're saying in this chapter is, if a person finds their own heart a little bit closed off, and a little bit desensitized. And they find themselves not really feeling the way they want to feel. The advice given in this chapter is chop up the log. Break open the wood. Break it open. No one should do it to anyone else. This is not like, oh, you're no good and you're this and you're... This is not about anyone else. This is a self-induced process of breaking oneself open, becoming more raw, real, and vulnerable so that we can start feeling once again. It's a process of recognizing, meditating, and really feeling but how we're not where we need to be, and how there's a long way to still go within ourselves, within our service of God, and therefore we're not satisfied with where we are. The premise of all of this is the reason why a heart can become unmoved and cold is because of satisfaction, inner satisfaction. I don't mean satisfaction in any other way other than I feel okay with where I am. I feel content. I'm good. Status quo is good. It's kosher. I said yesterday in synagogue right here, literally right here. I said that there's a what's it called again? A prohibition mentioned in yesterday's Torah portion about not creating gods made of cast metal. It says, don't create a god. Don't create a god out of cast metal. Like a very specific, like, what about wood? Also not wood. But this one says not out of cast metal. Why do you need that prohibition in Torah? Anyway, it already says don't worship idols. So why do you need that one about cast metal? So there's a non-literal interpretation that says, what is cast metal? Cast metal means, cast metal is status quo. Cast metal means that you're making a god out of the way things are. That's the way things are. They're rigid, they're solid, they're cast in a certain die. This is who I am, this is what I do, this is what I'm comfortable with, this is the way things are. And I make a god out of it. In other words, I say, this is an absolute. This is who I am and I can't change. And when we can't change and there's no growth left for us, that's when our heart becomes indifferent. The whole purpose of this chapter is to recognize that there's still more that we can achieve. There's more that we can accomplish. If at any point in time, a guy like Michael Jordan or a guy like Kobe or whichever athlete it is, if they would have ever told themselves, I've reached peak performance, you know what would have happened? They wouldn't have been the best in the world. They would not have been the best in the world. If they had ever told themselves, Elokei Masecha, that if they would ever created a God, if they would ever worshipped the status quo and said, what I have right now is good, it's the best it's ever going to be, if they ever believed that in their heart of hearts, they would have fallen off. They would have dropped. It's only when...
You sure that's not important?
Huh?
Are you sure that's not important?
What?
Somebody keeps calling you?
Yeah, I think it might be. So let me get this. Anyway, the point is, let me finish this up. The point is that that we all should strive for something greater, knowing that we still have a long way to go. Thank you very much for joining me today for Kabbalah and Calls, Kabbalah Coffee. Hello.